said, "You're late, young man." And I thought, oh, my career has ended before it begins. And I said, "I'm sorry, sir. I stopped to help somebody."
For years, people wondered what really went on behind the closed doors of Clint Walker's life. The man who played the tough, unbreakable cowboy on TV seemed perfect on screen. But his daughter, Valerie, has finally decided to speak up about what life was really like growing up with a Hollywood legend. And what she's sharing will completely change how you see the man who became America's favorite Western hero. Imagine being so famous that millions of people think they know you. They see you as strong, fearless, and impossible to hurt. But at home, behind closed curtains and locked doors, you're fighting battles nobody talks about. You're struggling with things that could destroy your career if anyone found out. That was Clint Walker's reality, and his daughter watched it all happen. Valerie Walker is 75 years old now. She's lived an incredible life herself, becoming one of the first female airline pilots in America. She's flown planes through dangerous situations and trained thousands of people. She's brave, just like her father. But for decades, she kept quiet about the harder parts of growing up as Clint Walker's daughter. She protected his image. She let the world believe the myth. But now, she's ready to tell the truth. Let's go back to the beginning. Clint Walker wasn't always a star. He wasn't even always called Clint. He was born Norman Eugene Walker on a spring day in 1927 in a small Illinois town. His mother was an immigrant from Czech lands who had left her husband when she was pregnant. She was alone, scared, and about to give birth to twins during one of the hardest times in American history. The Great Depression had crushed the country. People were starving. Jobs disappeared. Hope felt like a luxury most families couldn't afford. Clint and his twin sister Lucy came into a world that wasn't ready for them. Their mother moved from place to place, trying to find any kind of work that would put food on the table. There was no stable home, no comfortable childhood, no time for toys or games. Clint learned very early that life was hard and nobody was going to make it easier for you. You either worked or you went hungry. It was that simple. By the time he was 10 years old, Clint had already left school. Not because he wanted to, but because his family needed money. He started taking whatever jobs he could find. He worked in loud, dirty factories where the machines never stopped and the air was thick with smoke and grease. He worked on riverboats going up and down the Mississippi, doing back-breaking labor in the heat and cold. He was just a kid, but he was doing the work of grown men. The thing about Clint was that he didn't just work hard, he was also growing into someone impossible to ignore. By the time he was 16, he stood 6 feet and 6 inches tall. His body was solid muscle from all the physical labor. His hands were rough and scarred. His face was starting to show the kind of strength that would later make him a star. But back then, he was just another poor kid trying to survive. When he turned 17, World War II was still raging across the ocean. Young men were signing up to fight. Clint joined the Merchant Marine, even though he knew how dangerous it was. German submarines were hunting supply ships in the Atlantic Ocean, sinking them without warning. Sailors died cold and alone in the dark water. But Clint went anyway. He spent his late teenage years sailing through war zones, watching the ocean for threats, wondering if each trip might be his last. The war ended in 1945, and Clint came home, but he didn't come home soft. He came home tougher, quieter, and more serious about life. He'd seen things that changed him. He'd been close to death. He'd learned that tomorrow isn't promised to anyone. That understanding would stay with him for the rest of his life. After the war, Clint kept working brutal jobs. He moved to Texas and got hired at a foundry where he welded airplane parts. The heat from the welding torches burned his skin. The hours were endless. The pay was terrible. But he showed up every single day and did his job. His hands got covered in new scars from the sparks and metal. He saved every penny he could, even though it meant skipping meals sometimes. Rent came first, food came second, dreams came last. In 1947, he headed west to California. He got hired on oil rig crews, handling massive steel pipes in dangerous conditions. Men got hurt all the time on those rigs. Some got killed. The money was a little better than the foundry, but the risk was much higher. Clint kept his head down and kept working. He was building something inside himself, even if he didn't know it yet. He was learning how to survive anything. Then came Las Vegas. In 1948, Clint got a job as a doorman at the famous Sands Hotel. He stood at the entrance every night, towering over everyone who walked in. Frank Sinatra came through those doors. Dean Martin came through. Movie stars, gamblers, criminals, and dreamers all passed by Clint Walker. He didn't ask for autographs or favors. He just did his job, keeping drunk people in line and making sure nobody caused trouble. One night, someone noticed him. A Hollywood talent scout saw this giant of a man standing calm and quiet in the middle of all that chaos. The scout didn't care if Clint could act. He didn't ask about training or experience. He just asked if he wanted a shot at the movies. And that question changed everything. But before Hollywood came calling for real, Clint had one more dangerous job to do. In 1950, the Korean War started. Clint signed back up with the Merchant Marine. He was 23 years old and he was going back to sea. His ship hit massive storms that nearly sunk them. Twice they almost went down completely. One night off the coast of Korea, a typhoon surrounded them. The waves were like mountains. The wind screamed. The ship creaked and groaned like it was being torn apart. Clint thought that might be the end, but somehow they survived. That night changed something deep inside him. He started thinking about what really mattered in life. What was he doing? Where was he going? If he died out there in the ocean, what would he leave behind? These weren't easy questions. They bothered him. They made him realize he wanted more than just survival. He wanted a life that meant something.
When he finally came home from the sea, he was ready for something different. In 1954, a man named Henry Wilson found him. Wilson was a big-time Hollywood agent who had discovered other handsome actors like Rock Hudson. He had a reputation for finding guys who looked good on camera and turning them into stars. When he saw Clint, he knew he'd found something special. Wilson brought Clint in for a screen test. He handed him a script from a Western and told him to read. Clint had never acted in his life. He'd never been in a play. He'd never even thought about being an actor. But when he read those lines, something clicked. His voice was deep and powerful. His presence was undeniable. The camera loved him. Wilson renamed him Clint Walker on the spot and signed him to a contract. Within days, Warner Brothers offered him a deal. But Hollywood wasn't going to just throw him in front of cameras and hope for the best. First, they sent him to what people called cowboy school. It wasn't a joke. For long hours every day, Clint learned how to ride horses properly. He learned how to fall off horses without getting hurt. He learned how to handle guns, throw punches, and survive on camera. Real stuntmen taught him. He got bruises and cuts and kept getting back up. All those years of hard work in factories and on ships had prepared him for this. He could handle pain. He could handle exhaustion. He could handle anything they threw at him. On September 20th, 1955, a show called Cheyenne aired on television for the first time. Clint Walker was the star. The first episode showed him fighting bandits on a snowy mountain. It felt real in a way that TV westerns had never felt before. The show was an hour long, which was unusual. Most shows were only 30 minutes. The action was bigger, the stakes felt higher, and Clint, standing tall and quiet and dangerous, became an instant sensation. 10 million people watched that first episode. Letters poured into the studio. Everyone wanted to know who this new cowboy was. The show kept pulling from Clint's real-life experiences. When they filmed episodes with river scenes, they sent him to freezing rivers in Utah. Other actors got sick from the cold water. Clint didn't even flinch. He'd been in colder water on those merchant ships. He did his own stunts, soaking wet and freezing, while the cameras captured something genuine. Audiences could feel the difference. This wasn't some soft Hollywood actor pretending to be tough. This was the real thing. But Hollywood almost ruined it. In the first 2 episodes, studio executives thought Clint's deep voice was too much for television. So they did something crazy. They had another actor dub over his voice. They replaced Clint's real voice with someone else's. Fans absolutely hated it. Angry letters flooded the studio. People were furious. They wanted the real Clint Walker, not some fake version. By the 3rd episode, the studio gave in and let Clint use his own voice. The difference was immediate and powerful. That voice became part of what made him a legend. During filming in 1956, something happened that showed who Clint Walker really was. A stuntman got thrown from a horse and was seriously injured. Clint saw it happen and immediately walked off the set. He refused to keep filming. He told Warner Brothers they needed better safety equipment for everyone. The studio didn't want to spend the money. They tried to pressure him to get back to work, but Clint wouldn't budge. He stood his ground until they agreed to make things safer. What he fought for that day became a model for the whole industry. Horse stunts got safer because Clint Walker said enough was enough. The show became a massive hit. Over 7 seasons, they made 108 episodes. Clint's pay went from basically nothing to $1,500 per episode, which was huge money back then. He went from being a poor kid who skipped meals to being one of the most recognized faces in America. But that success came with a price nobody saw. Clint Walker never used stunt doubles when he could avoid it. He wanted every dangerous moment to look real because he was actually doing it. In one episode from 1960, he had to wrangle 200 cattle by hand across the Arizona desert. The heat was so intense that he collapsed from exhaustion afterward, but he got the scene done first. Viewers could see the sweat, feel the danger, and believe every second of it because it wasn't fake. That episode shot Cheyenne into the top 10 shows on television. 2 years later, during night filming in the cold desert, his horse threw him hard. He broke a rib on impact. Most actors would have stopped production and gone to the hospital. Clint kept going. He finished the scene while trying not to show how much pain he was in. That injury actually made his performance better because the pain was real. You could see it in his eyes. Fans never forgot that episode. But while Clint Walker was becoming America's hero on television, his private life was falling apart in ways nobody knew about. Behind the scenes, he was burning himself out. The filming schedule was brutal. 16-hour days were normal. The pressure was constant. And Clint found a way to cope that would nearly destroy him. He started smoking cigarettes. Not just a few, 2 whole packs every single day. The smoking wrecked his lungs. It damaged his voice. Sometimes he had to take breaks just to catch his breath. He became anxious when he couldn't smoke. His hands would shake during withdrawals. He kept it secret from almost everyone because he was terrified it would end his career.
If people knew that the strong, tough cowboy couldn't breathe properly, they might not want him anymore. So he hid it and kept smoking, even though he knew it was killing him. The smoking wasn't the only secret. After Cheyenne ended in 1963, Clint fell into a deep depression. He'd been the cowboy for so long that he didn't know who he was without the show. Hollywood saw him as one thing and one thing only. He felt trapped. The fame that millions of people wanted felt like a prison to him. He seriously thought about quitting everything and moving to a ranch in Montana. He dreamed about disappearing, living quietly away from cameras and crowds and pressure. Part of him just wanted to be left alone. But something darker was happening too. Clint started drinking heavily. Especially after his first marriage fell apart, alcohol became his escape. He'd work all day, then drink whiskey at night. Sometimes he'd drink so much that he'd black out and not remember what happened. There were nights when he disappeared completely, and nobody knew where he was. Valerie was just a girl then, and she remembers the fear of waiting for her father to come home, not knowing if he was safe or what condition he'd be in. There were close calls that the public never heard about. In 1967, Clint had a near-fatal incident that landed him in the hospital. Friends and family knew something was seriously wrong. They tried to help him, tried to get him to slow down, but he was stubborn. He always showed up to work the next day like nothing had happened. He was good at hiding the damage. Too good. Years later, Valerie would talk about how hard it was to watch her father struggle. She saw the strong man from television, but she also saw the broken man at home. She saw someone who was suffering but didn't know how to ask for help. Hollywood had built him up as this unbreakable hero, and maybe Clint felt like he had to live up to that image, even when he was falling apart inside. There's something else Valerie has hinted at over the years, something that made Clint deeply uncomfortable about his early days in Hollywood. His first agent, Henry Wilson, wasn't just a talent scout. Wilson had a reputation for something much darker. He was known for taking advantage of young actors. There were stories about him making disgusting deals, offering roles in exchange for favors that had nothing to do with talent. Clint never said directly that Wilson did anything to him, but he talked about feeling used. He felt like he was a pawn in someone else's game. After Clint cut ties with Wilson and changed his stage name from Jet Mormon to Clint Walker, he never spoke well of that period. There was shame there, a wound that never fully healed. Valerie said her father carried that feeling his whole life, the feeling that Hollywood had tried to twist him into something he wasn't, that they'd tried to control him and use him. It made him suspicious of people. It made him guard his private life even more carefully. But let's talk about Clint's family life because that's where some of the most important parts of this story happened. Clint married his first wife Vera back in 1948 when he was 21 years old. This was long before the fame, before the cameras, before any of it. They were just two young people trying to figure out life together. Vera came from a simple family in Illinois. She wasn't interested in Hollywood glamour. She wanted a normal life with a good man. Their daughter Valerie was born in 1950. When Cheyenne started making Clint famous, everything changed for the family. Clint was gone all the time, filming in distant locations. But he did something unusual for a Hollywood father. He brought Valerie with him sometimes. He even homeschooled her himself during shoots. He didn't want his daughter growing up surrounded by fake people and cameras. He wanted her to stay grounded and real. Valerie grew up watching her father do dangerous stunts. She saw him get hurt. She saw him push through pain. But she also saw the other side, the drinking, the exhaustion, the way fame was eating away at him. As she got older, she started to understand that her father was more complicated than the hero everyone else saw. In 1968, after 20 years of marriage, Clint and Vera quietly divorced. There were no scandals, no big courtroom battles, no magazine interviews. They'd just drifted apart over the years. Clint's career had pulled him in one direction, while Vera stayed grounded in another. They handled it with dignity. Vera refused to take alimony money. She wanted to stay independent. And Clint remained committed to Valerie. Even though the marriage ended, the respect between them stayed intact. Valerie handled the divorce by throwing herself into something extraordinary. She'd always loved planes. Clint supported her completely. In 1966, when she was only 16 years old, he paid for her to start taking flying lessons. Most teenage girls in the 1960s weren't encouraged to do things like that. But Clint believed in her daughter. He saw her strength and independence, and he wanted to help her chase her dreams. By 1968, Valerie had soloed in a small plane. She was 18 years old and already logging serious flight hours. She took crop dusting jobs to pay her way. She was fearless in the sky. Over the next few years, she became a flight instructor, teaching over 50 students. Then she joined the Los Angeles Police Department's Aerial Patrol Unit, flying helicopters over the city. She was one of the first women doing that kind of police work. Some of the male officers didn't want her there. They tested her. They tried to break her confidence. But Valerie kept flying, kept proving herself, until they had no choice but to respect her. Then she did something even more incredible. In 1974, Valerie took a job bush flying in Africa. She flew cargo planes into remote villages in Botswana and South Africa. She landed on rough dirt runways surrounded by wild animals. Once, an entire herd of elephants blocked her landing strip, and she had to wait for hours alone in the cockpit. There were dust storms, engine failures, moments where she had to think fast or people would die. When Valerie came back to the United States, she made history. On March 8, 1976, she became the first female pilot hired by Western Airlines. She flew massive commercial jets across the country. The airline industry wasn't ready for a woman in the cockpit. Some male pilots mocked her, some tested her, some tried to make her quit. But Valerie just kept doing her job perfectly. She flew with such skill and calm that eventually everyone had to admit she belonged there. By the time she retired from Delta Airlines in 2005, Valerie had logged over 20,000 flight hours. She'd flown some of the biggest planes in the sky. After the September 11 attacks, she created self-defense programs for flight crews. She trained over 1,000 airline workers. She saw a problem and solved it, just like her father would have done. Now let's go back to Clint and talk about the day that almost ended everything. May 24, 1971. Clint was skiing at Mammoth Mountain in California. He was on a steep run when he lost control. He tumbled 400 feet down the icy slope. It happened so fast. One of his ski poles was pointing up from the snow, and as his body hit it, the pole drove 5 inches straight into his chest. The pole punctured the sac around his heart. Blood started filling the space around his heart, putting pressure on it, making it impossible for his heart to beat properly. This condition is called cardiac tamponade, and it's almost always fatal. Clint managed to yell once before he passed out. His body started turning blue. He was dying. Ski Patrol rushed him down the mountain and drove him 45 miles to a small hospital in Bishop, California. When doctors examined him, they couldn't find a pulse. They couldn't find blood pressure. Clint Walker was pronounced dead. The doctors believed he was gone. They were about to give up. But then something strange happened. Another doctor was walking past the room and noticed a tiny movement in his chest, just the smallest sign of a breath. It was barely there, but it was enough. They rushed him to the basement because the hospital didn't have a proper surgical theater. There was no time for anesthesia, no time for proper equipment. They cut him open right there.
For 2.5 hours, the doctors worked by hand to save his life. They removed blood clots. They massaged his heart, trying to restart it. They weren't even sure it was possible. Clint had been clinically dead.
His heart had stopped. His body had turned blue. But his massive chest and incredible physical strength gave him a tiny chance. Somehow, against everything medical science said was possible, his heart started beating again. Clint later talked about what he experienced during those minutes when he was dead. He said he wasn't inside his body anymore. He was floating above it, watching the doctors work on him. He could see everything from above. He felt completely peaceful, more alert and alive than he'd ever felt, which was strange because he knew he was dead. There was no fear, no pain, just calm. He felt like he understood things that had always been hidden from him, like secrets of the universe were suddenly clear. But then he felt something pulling him back. Not pain, but purpose. Something unfinished. Something calling him to return. So he did. He came back to life. 8 days later, Clint Walker walked out of that hospital on his own feet. He had no brain damage, no permanent injuries beyond the scar across his chest with 20 stitches. He checked into UCLA Medical Center for a few more days of observation, then went home. 2 months later, he was back on a movie set, riding horses and doing action scenes like nothing had happened. The doctors called him a medical miracle. They said survival from that kind of injury, in that location, with those circumstances, was almost unheard of. Fans from all over the world wrote him letters. They thanked him for sharing his story. They said it gave them faith. Clint told them that faith and gratitude were what gave him the strength to come back. But Valerie saw what the accident really did to her father. The physical survival was one thing. The emotional and mental impact was something else. That experience of dying and coming back changed Clint in ways that weren't always positive. He became more paranoid, more suspicious. He started therapy because he couldn't shake the feeling that something in Hollywood was always watching him, always waiting to use him or hurt him. The accident had opened his heart, but it had also opened a wound that never fully closed. The accident also forced Clint to confront his other demons. He'd been smoking 2 packs a day for years. After the accident, he realized that if he'd still been smoking, he probably wouldn't have survived. His lungs wouldn't have been strong enough. So he quit. It wasn't easy. The withdrawals were terrible, but he did it because he wanted to live. The drinking was harder to face. Through the 1970s, Clint struggled with alcohol. He'd have good periods where he seemed fine, and then he'd fall back into it. Valerie watched her father fight this battle over and over. She was an adult by then, making her own way as a pilot, but she still worried about him. She still felt that childhood fear of not knowing if her father was okay. Clint married again in 1974. Her name was Giselle Hennessy, though people called her Giselle. She wasn't in the entertainment business. She liked quiet. She supported Clint's career but stayed out of the spotlight. They were together for 20 years. When she died from cancer in 1994, Clint was devastated. He disappeared from public life for months. He'd lost his partner, his support, the person who helped him through his darkest times. He was 67 years old, and he grieved like a man who didn't know how to keep going. 3 years later, in 1997, Clint married for the third and final time. Susan was her name. They got married in Grass Valley, California. Clint was 70 years old. During their honeymoon, they went on hikes together, and Clint told her everything. He told her the full story of his accident. He showed her the scars. He talked about what dying had felt like. He opened up about his struggles with alcohol and cigarettes. He was honest with her in a way he had never been with anyone. Susan stayed with him through everything that came next. The chronic illnesses of old age, the fading of fame, the quiet years when the world had mostly forgotten about the tall cowboy from television. She never left his side. On May 21, 2018, Clint Walker died at the age of 90. The cause was congestive heart failure. His heart, which had been pierced by a ski pole and stopped beating 47 years earlier, finally gave out for good. Valerie told reporters that her father died the way he lived, with grit and strength until the very end. Over his life, Clint appeared in more than 50 Western films and television shows. Cheyenne ran for 7 seasons and defined an entire era of television. He was honored at film festivals. His name is on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. People still remember him as one of the greatest cowboys who ever appeared on screen. But Valerie wants people to know the whole truth. She wants them to understand that her father wasn't just the strong, silent hero. He was a man who struggled, a man who made mistakes, a man who battled addiction and depression and the dark side of fame. He was someone who got hurt, who felt pain, who was scared sometimes. He was human. Valerie kept these secrets for decades because she loved her father and wanted to protect him. But now that he's gone, she believes people deserve to know the real Clint Walker, not the myth, not the image that Hollywood created, but the actual man who worked brutal jobs as a kid, who sailed through war zones, who nearly died on a mountain and came back to life, who fought private battles that nobody saw. She wants people to know that her father's strength wasn't just about muscles and stunts. It was about getting up every morning and trying again even when he'd failed the night before. It was about facing his demons and working to be better. It was about surviving when survival seemed impossible. Valerie herself is proof of her father's legacy. She became a pioneer in aviation. She broke barriers. She saved lives. She did things that people said women couldn't do. And she learned that strength from watching Clint. Not just the hero version of him, but the struggling, complicated, real version. That's the man who taught her to be brave. That's the man who supported her dreams even when he was fighting his own nightmares. The truth about Clint Walker is more complicated than the simple cowboy story. But it's also more inspiring, because he wasn't born perfect. He wasn't naturally heroic. He was just a poor kid from Illinois who worked hard, survived terrible things, made mistakes, fought his way through darkness and kept going. He became a legend not because he was flawless, but because he refused to give up. Valerie wants people to understand that it's okay to struggle. It's okay to have battles that nobody else can see. It's okay to be broken and still be strong. Her father proved that every single day of his life. Even when he was drinking too much, or smoking too much, or feeling depressed, he kept trying. He kept working. He kept showing up for the people who needed him. And in the end, maybe that's what real heroism looks like. Not the gunfights and the stunts, not the perfect image on a television screen, but the quiet courage of facing another day when everything inside you wants to quit. That's what Clint Walker did. That's what his daughter learned from him. And that's the truth she's finally sharing with the world. If this story touched you, if you learned something new about Clint Walker, or if you just appreciate honest stories about real people, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves classic westerns or who needs to hear a story about courage and survival. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel because we're dedicated to bringing you the truth behind the legends, the real stories behind the famous faces, the complicated, messy, beautiful truth about the people we thought we knew. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.